We also have to analyze the current year movements in the retained earnings of the subsidiary, and the first item we look at is profit for the year. Remember our two steps. We first have to attribute what the equity participants are entitled to, and then we'll look at any dividends declared. Now, true to Chapter 8, the question you have to ask is that profit of 130,000 representing the profit of S from the TB of S. Who is that attributable to? Is that full 130,000 Rand attributable to the ordinary shares, or is there perhaps a portion of that 130,000 Rand that is attributable to the preference shares? Now, your answer depends on whether it's cumulative or non-cumulative preference shares, and depending on that, whether the dividend was declared or not. Now, in this example, it is cumulative preference shares. And based on previous discussions, we've said that your cumulative preference shareholders are entitled to their fixed annual dividend every year, regardless of whether that dividend was declared or not. So what you would have to do is to exclude from that 130,000 Rand profit the 10,000 annual fixed preference dividend, and what you are left with, the 120,000 Rand, that is the profit of the subsidiary that's attributable to the ordinary shareholders. But please note, the reason why we deduct that 10,000 Rand is not the actual dividend I'm deducting there. Dividends declared is not an expense. I'm not excluding the dividend declared from my profit. I'm merely taking the total profit of the subsidiary and splitting that between the portion attributable to the ordinary shareholders and the portion attributable to the preference shareholders. I'm still busy with step 1, attributing. So if I know that the portion attributable to the ordinary shareholders is 120,000 Rand, then I am able to attribute to my ordinary shareholders. And my ordinary shareholder percentage is parent NCI, and that is based on the 70%, 30% shareholding, and the amount for NCI would then be 36,000 Rand. And again, for that I need a consolidation journal entry where I attribute profit of S to NCI. But you still have to attribute the full 130,000 Rand. You have only up to now attributed 120,000 Rand. So what you now have to do, and this is one step that I've seen from past experience that often is not done by the students. That 10,000 Rand that you have excluded from the 130,000 Rand also needs to be attributed. And that is attributed to the parent and NCI based on their 40%, 60% preference shareholding. And that then gives you the 6,000 Rand. And for that, you will now have a second journal of attributing profit of S to NCI. Again, the reason why you are excluding the 10,000 Rand from the 130,000 Rand is because that is the portion of that profit that is attributable to the preference shares. It's not the actual dividend. And we do this step of taking out the 10,000 happens because it's cumulative and it will happen every year, regardless of whether the dividend was declared or not. Some of you may now wonder, why do I suddenly have that second consolidation journal entry for the 6,000 for NCI, where we said in the prior reporting period it was not necessary? Remember, in your statement of changes in equity, and the timeline talks to the statement of changes in equity, In the current year, you have a line item profit for the year where all the amounts that you've attributed will be included. And then you have a line item for dividends declared in the statement of changes in equity where you show the effect of the dividend declared. The net effect for the year will again be zero, but because we work in the statement of changes in equity for the current year, you need to show the detailed movements. But let me now show you the effect of the dividend, because the dividend will be another movement in the current year. And the first one I'm going to look at is the ordinary dividend. There was 15,000 ordinary dividend declared by S. That will be attributed to parent NCI based on their 70%, 30%, shareholding as ordinary shareholders, and there will have to be a dividend elimination journal. Then, on top of that, there was the preference dividend. And now I'm talking about the actual dividend declared. You only have this negative movement in the retained earnings of the subsidiary when the actual dividend was declared. That will now be attributed to parent NCI in their percentage holding 40%, 60% as preference shareholders. And there will be a consolidation journal entry to eliminate the effect of this dividend declared by the subsidiary. So immediately in chapter 8, you'll pick up that we can have more than one elimination journal entry for a dividend declared. And after these consolidation journal entries have been processed, you would have ended up attributing the 6,000 Rand to NCI preference shares, but after the dividend journal, there will be a debit to NCI again for the 6,000 Rand. But as I've said, you need to show the detailed movement for the current year in the statement of changes in equity, but this now proves in prior periods, the net effect was zero because what you attribute is what also was declared. Right, so what I'd like to show you now is the analysis of equity. And the good news is all the hard work has now been done because we've discussed all the movements in equity of S on the timeline. I only want to show you now how that will be reflected in the analysis of equity. And the moment you have preference shares in the subsidiary's equity, there will be a preference share analysis as well. But the first one we look at now is the analysis of equity in the ordinary shares of the subsidiary. Now, the at acquisition section is very similar to what you've seen before. You now have the ordinary share capital and you have the retained earnings at. Now, at this point, I'm just going to ask the question, but I'm going to leave it there for a while. And when we do the other examples, we'll get back to it. That retained earnings at, you also have to ask the question whether that 7,500 in this example is fully attributable to the ordinary shares or whether there's maybe a portion of that also attributable to your preference shares. But in this example, it's all attributable to the ordinary shares because, and here's the answer to that, the preference dividend has never been in arrears. Right, but I'm going to leave it at that. We'll get back to that in the other examples. Against that total equity, we eliminate what the parent paid, and the question said that the NCI is measured at their proportionate share, which is the total equity of S multiplied by the 30%, and as a result, you have goodwill from your ordinary shares. Then we said, since to opening balance, you always start with the TB amount. Always start with what you have available in the TB of S. We deduct the at, the 7,500, which is the actual movement in the retained earnings of S, and there's that 110,000 Rand, which we also had on the timeline. Now, please refer to this discussion O at the bottom of this analysis. It takes you through that whole explanation that I did on the timeline if you need further confirmation of that. That then gets attributed to parent and NCI. And what do we know? The moment you have an amount for NCI, you need a consolidation journal entry. What you need to be able to do at this point is to calculate that movement of 110,000 Rand and understand who that is attributable to. And we had that discussion on the timeline. It's fully attributable to the ordinary shares because to get to that TB amount, the portion of the preference dividend was already excluded. Then in the current year, we start again with the TB, 130,000 Rand profit. Now we exclude the portion attributable to the preference shareholders. That gives me the 120,000 Rand attributable to the ordinary shareholders. That gets attributed to parent NCI. The moment you have something for NCI, there's another consolidation journal entry. Now in the ordinary share analysis, you only put the ordinary dividend, and the moment it is declared, the actual ordinary dividend ends up in the analysis. And why is it in the analysis? Remember, this total column is all about the actual movements in the equity of S, which then gets attributed to your equity participants. And in this line item for the dividends, here you can pick up that it's necessary to go and write a consolidation journal entry to eliminate the effect of this dividend.